Imagine a machine so fast and so sharp, it felt like a samurai sword with jet engines. This is the story of the MU-2, when Japanese perfection met American hubris. In the 1960s, Mitsubishi brought a monster to the United States. It was a short-wing turboprop that could outrun almost anything in the sky. It was engineered with a level of precision that would make a Swiss watch look like a toy. But when this Japanese masterpiece landed in the hands of casual American pilots, something went horribly wrong. Those pilots treated it like a slower plane, leaning on habits that could not tame a craft that used spoilers instead of ailerons. They did not realize that one small mistake in a cloud of ice could lead to a catastrophic outcome. The situation became so intense that the United States government had to step in and change the rules of aviation. Was the MU-2 a genius invention ahead of its time, or was it a mechanical trap waiting for the first sign of human arrogance? The mandate was clear: build a machine faster than the competition, able to leap off a short strip and climb with turbine muscle. Mitsubishi's engineers, working in Nagoya's post-war factories, started with a single question: how do you make a turboprop that slices through the sky like a katana but lands on a dirt road? The answer was a wing that looked almost too short for its own good. At just over 31 feet, it was stiffer, thicker, and carried more weight per square foot than anything in its class. High wing loading wasn't a side effect, it was the price of speed. The MU-2 would cruise at nearly 300 knots, outpacing piston twins and even giving small jets a run for their money. But that short wing came with a problem. You needed massive lift to get out of a tight field, and every inch of the trailing edge was precious. So the engineers did something radical. They covered the entire trailing edge with electrically driven flaps, no room left for ailerons. When those flaps dropped, the wing grew by more than 20%, turning a high-speed blade into a slow-landing lifeline. The MU-2 could drop into a 2,000-foot strip, then climb out with one engine and a nose held high. But with every inch of flap, the margin for error narrowed. The wing was unforgiving if you didn't respect its physics. One engineer, years later, described it like this: "We gave the pilot a sword. If he used it with discipline, nothing could touch him. If he got careless, the sword would cut him instead." This design, short, fast, and all in on performance, set the stage for everything that followed. The MU-2's wing was a masterpiece of precision, but it forced a choice: either invent a new way to roll the airplane, or give up on the dream of full-span flaps and short-field supremacy. Mitsubishi chose innovation over compromise. That decision would ripple through every flight, every checklist, and every mishap that followed. Spoilers, not ailerons. That was the bet Mitsubishi made, a gamble as sharp as the steel that forged the samurai's blade. With the entire trailing edge surrendered to those massive, electrically driven flaps, there was no space left for tradition. Instead, the MU-2 would roll on command by raising thin metal panels on the upper wing, spoilers that killed lift on one side and forced the airplane to bank, fast and true. The logic was ruthless. More flap meant more lift meant shorter runways, and spoilers meant you could have both without compromise. No other twin in its class dared such a move. But a spoiler system is not a forgiving teacher. There is no gentle warning, no softening of the edge. The roll response is direct, almost surgical. At low speeds, the MU-2 answers with a smooth, predictable bank. Better than ailerons, some said, especially when the flaps are out and the air is thick. But push it faster, and the controls grow heavier, the feedback dulls, and the margin for error shrinks to the width of the blade itself. The pilot must use electrically driven trim tabs to keep the control wheel centered, a detail that rewards discipline and punishes distraction. What made this possible was not just clever aerodynamics, it was the factory floor in Nagoya. Here, every actuator, every hinge, every spoiler arm was measured, inspected, and signed off with a zero-defect stamp. The assembly line ran like a swordsmith's forge, nothing left to chance. Every flaw hunted down and eliminated before it could reach the field. Mitsubishi's engineers worked with the same relentless precision as the men who once folded steel for katanas, believing that a perfect machine could only be built by perfect hands. In the end, the MU-2's spoiler system became its signature, an innovation born of necessity, executed with the severity of a master's cut. It was a tool for those who respected the blade, not a toy for the careless. The sword was sharp, and the sword did not forgive. Texas in the late 1960s was an oil-fueled kingdom of speed, and the MU-2 arrived like a blade through butter. The first demo flights cut across the state with the precision of a factory-fresh katana, Dallas, San Antonio, and the endless tarmac of San Angelo. At each stop, the pitch was simple: this machine will outrun your Baron, land on your cattle strip, and make you feel like you've stepped into the jet age for half the price. On the San Angelo line, airframes arrived from Japan, sealed in crates, flawless and gleaming. American hands bolted on Garrett turbines and fitted radios tuned to the wide-open Texas sky. The completion center became a shrine to performance. Pilots and would-be owners drove in from Amarillo, Houston, even as far as Oklahoma, crowding the hangar for a chance at the controls. The salesman didn't need to exaggerate. The numbers spoke for themselves. 300 knots in cruise, a climb rate that left piston twins gasping, and a short field landing that made crop dusters jealous. The MU-2's arrival was a spectacle. At Dallas Love Field, the aircraft dropped out of a November sky, touched down on a 3,000-foot strip, and taxied to the ramp before most onlookers realized what they'd witnessed. Newspaper headlines called it a Japanese turboprop that flies like a fighter. Charter operators, oil executives, and doctor pilots lined up to sign purchase agreements. The aircraft's sharp lines and military pedigree made it irresistible, a tool for those who saw themselves as masters of their domain. But beneath the showroom gloss, the archetype of the owner-operator was being forged. These were men, almost always men, who believed their checkbook and a few hours in the right seat could buy them mastery of a katana. The Texas hub became a proving ground not just for the airplane, but for the American instinct to shortcut discipline with confidence. For now, the mood was pure adrenaline. The warnings would come later. In Texas, the MU-2's arrival set off a wave of ambition and impatience. The aircraft was sold with a handshake and a promise. Any competent twin pilot could master it with little more than a dealer checkout and a few circuits around the patch. There was no FAA type rating required, no formal transition course, and no regulatory firewall between a Piper owner and a machine that demanded surgical precision. For many American buyers, the process felt like buying a muscle car: sign the papers, take the keys, and learn the quirks on the road. At the San Angelo Completion Center, pilots would drive in, step out of their Cadillacs, and expect to be airborne after a brief walk-around and a checklist read at leisure. Mitsubishi's engineers, fresh from the discipline of Nagoya, watched this unfold with a sense of quiet disbelief. In Japan, mastery began on the ground. Every pre-flight was a ritual, every checklist a contract. The idea that a pilot would climb aboard, fire up the turbines, and only then skim the manual was as foreign as skipping a swordsmith's inspection before battle. One engineer, still in his 20s, wrote in a letter home that they treat the airplane like a pickup truck. They skip the blade inspection and trust their luck. The gap between design and operation grew wider with each delivery. American pilots, used to forgiving ailerons and docile stall characteristics, brought piston habits to a turboprop that punished casualness. The dealer checkout became the norm: an hour in the right seat, a few touch and goes, and a logbook signature. No simulator time, no deep dive into spoiler mechanics, no drills for engine outroll or icing recovery. The FAA, for its part, saw no reason to demand more. The MU-2 was certified as a normal category twin, not a high-performance outlier. Buyers believed the sales pitch: if you could handle a Baron, you could handle this. Inside the Mitsubishi camp, the sense of foreboding grew. Engineers began to document their observations, pilots skipping critical steps, maintenance logs left half complete, checklists abandoned in cup holders. The machine was perfect, but the operating culture was anything but. The sword was sharp, and it was now being handed to those who had never learned to respect the edge. The vulnerabilities were seeded not in the metal, but in the mindset. Soon, the autopsy would begin. 61 pounds per square foot. That is the number stamped into every MU-2 wing, the unyielding metric that set it apart from the moment it left the factory. Most piston twins of the era hovered in the mid-50s, but Mitsubishi's design demanded more: higher loading, higher speed, and margins measured in inches, not feet. The wing itself stretched just 31 feet from tip to tip, shorter than its rivals, but built to carry more weight at greater velocity, slicing through the air with the indifference of a blade honed for a single purpose. Every aerodynamic decision was a negotiation with physics. The short span meant less flex, more stiffness, and a stall that arrived not as a gentle buffet, but as a sudden withdrawal of lift. There was no cushion for sloppiness. The entire control system was engineered for rapid, exact response. Spoilers, not ailerons, governed the roll, thin metal panels that deployed above the wing, destroying lift on one side and forcing the aircraft to bank. The numbers here are not open to interpretation. A hydraulic system, powered off the left engine, delivered full spoiler deflection in just 0.15 seconds. At cruise, that translated into a roll rate of nearly 30 degrees per second, enough to snap the aircraft into a bank before a distracted pilot could even process the change. The MU-2's flaps were electrically driven, but the spoilers relied on hydraulic muscle and a pressure accumulator to guarantee actuation even if the left engine went silent. Roll trim was handled by electric tabs on the trailing edge, allowing the pilot to center the wheel and neutralize the system for hands-off flight. But this balance was razor thin. Any deviation, too much input, or a missed trim adjustment could send the aircraft beyond the safe envelope in the blink of an eye. There was no room for improvisation. The MU-2's physics demanded discipline, precision, and a respect for hard limits. The sword was sharp, and the blade did not care about anyone's reputation. In this cockpit, the numbers ruled, and the penalty for ignoring them was written in the accident reports that would soon follow. The first real test was never about the numbers on the spec sheet. It was about what happened when the blade met the bone, when a pilot, flush with confidence, lost an engine on climb-out, or found himself in freezing rain with the wrong flap setting. The MU-2 did not care about reputation or logbook hours. Its physics was simple and brutal and unforgiving. Asymmetric thrust would roll the airplane hard toward the failed engine, and the spoilers, those elegant, ruthless devices, would answer only if the pilot knew the exact sequence. There was no room for improvisation. In the simulator, instructors watched as seasoned pilots, trained on docile twins, reached for aileron muscle memory and found nothing. The roll response was non-linear, the kind of curve that punishes hesitation. At 150 knots, a slight wheel input could snap the aircraft into a bank before the mind caught up. Under icing, the rule was clear: never deploy flaps below 150 knots. Ignore it, and the wing could betray you, the spoilers losing their bite just when you needed them most. One investigator reviewing the wreckage of an MU-2 that spun out in a winter climb put it bluntly: "This is a katana. You do not grab the blade, you respect the edge, or you pay the price." The verdict was not kind to American pilot culture. Simulator studies showed that with proper asymmetric thrust technique and strict adherence to the icing flap rule, the aircraft stayed inside the envelope. But when pilots brought piston habits, slow, casual checklist optional habits, into the MU-2, the autopsy always found the same thing. The machine asked for discipline, and Hubris answered with shortcuts. The shame was institutional. Manuals were rewritten, checklists laminated, but the accidents kept coming until the FAA forced the issue with mandatory training. The final word from the forensic desk was clear: the sword was perfect, but the hand that wielded it too often reached for the wrong end. Numbers do not lie, and the MU-2's ledger was written in hard consequence. By the late 1970s, the accident reports began stacking up, first a handful, then a steady drumbeat that echoed across insurance offices and FAA conference rooms. Between 1975 and 1985, more than 30 catastrophic outcomes were logged in the United States alone, with a pattern impossible to ignore. Loss of control after takeoff, roll excursions in icing, pilots caught off guard by a machine that punished shortcuts with finality. The NTSB files read like a grim catalog of engine-out mishandlings, spoiler mismanagement, and checklist steps skipped in the rush to get airborne. The so-called Dr. Killer reputation stuck, not because of any flaw in Japanese engineering, but because too many believed they could buy mastery with a signature and a handshake. One FAA analyst reviewing the spike wrote that this is not a forgiving airplane. It is a katana, precise, sharp, and merciless to the unprepared. The stigma grew, fueled by headlines and grim statistics, until public trust in the MU-2's safety had all but collapsed. The crisis was no longer deniable. Something had to change, and the call for regulatory action became impossible to ignore. SFAR 108 landed like a judgment from above. 12 dense pages in the Federal Register, effective December 2006, spelled out exactly what it would take to wield the katana without slicing through your own reputation. For the first time in American aviation, a single aircraft demanded its own rulebook. No grandfathering, no shortcuts. Every MU-2 pilot now faced a mandatory training gauntlet, initial transition for the newcomers, recurrent drills for the veterans, and a written exam that left no room for guesswork. The core requirement was clinical, minimum 1 hour in a certified simulator every year, focused on the same subjects that filled the accident reports: spoiler roll handling, engine-out recovery, icing awareness, and strict checklist discipline. The FAA's language was unflinching. The FAA said the MU-2 is not a forgiving aircraft, and that the training must match the machine. That meant no more dealer checkouts, no more handshake endorsements. Flight Safety International, long a byword for corporate jet training, was tapped to develop the PROP curriculum, Pilot-Reliant Operational Performance. PROP did not just teach procedures, it drilled muscle memory for the non-linear roll, the knife-edge stall, and the split-second decisions that separate a clean landing from a catastrophic outcome. Instructors walked pilots through the exact sequence for asymmetric thrust, the spoiler response curve, and the icing flap rule that had tripped up so many before. Every lesson was written in the language of consequence. By the time the first wave of pilots cycled through prop, the old bravado had faded. The sword was still sharp, but now the hands reaching for it were forced to learn the grip. The regulatory hammer had fallen, and the era of casual mastery was over. Today, every MU-2 in American skies flies under the shadow of a lesson written in wreckage and reinforced in regulation. Precision is no match for bravado. A katana demands respect every time it is drawn. The engineering endures, but the margin for error remains razor-thin. Aviation still tests our humility because the sharpest tool is as safe or as fatal as the hands that wield it. Share your thoughts below.